Howdy, you delicious people. I'm here today to review Red Dragon. So not only is this movie adapted from a book, but it's also technically a remake. Because when looking at it, this movie is actually a remake of a movie called Manhunter from 1986. So when even going in watching this film, after watching it, I was like, why does this movie seem so familiar? And eventually I was told it's like, oh yeah, because like this movie is just like Manhunter. I'm like, oh my god, yeah, like I remember seeing Manhunter, like, and I never made the connection. Because I think at one point when I saw like Silence of the Lambs, I eventually end up seeing Manhunter, and then I was like, oh, okay, this is interesting. So with that, Red Dragon is to, of course, be a very interesting movie. Uh, and for me, I like the pacing of this film. Um, I like that they kind of deliver so much dialogue that doesn't feel boring. It's very fascinating, and like uh, it definitely was to consistently keep my attention. Even though I'm like, man, there's a lot going on in this film. So with that said, this movie, of course, is to be the sequel to Silence of the Lambs, and then eventually it seems after Silence of the Lambs, it's actually Clarice, the show, which honestly, I was tempted to want to review Clarice at one point, and I started watching the pilot episode, and then I'm like, there is far too much information going on into like half of this episode. There is no humanly way that I can think to try and go on and review that show. So I just kind of gave up immediately, and I was like, there's no way I can review this. Like, my brain can't process all this stuff going on. So I will probably just keep going through the movies of things, and hopefully not getting too complicated of a film. But anyways, uh, and then after that, of course, we get the prequels. It seems that they did, or the prequels. We get Hannibal, and then we of course get Hannibal Rising, and then we get like. So what happened was they did Silence of the Lambs first, then they ended up doing Hannibal, then they did two prequels, and then they called it a day. Every once in a while, we'll still get a Hannibal show. We'll still, because there's the Hannibal show that exists. There's so many things that kind of somehow or another, in a roundabout way, like are attached to this. Uh, but anyways, let's go on and attach ourselves into Red Dragon and tell you what this movie is about. So we have Will that in the beginning of this film is going to Hannibal Lecter for advice about this new killer that he's going after. Come to find out, will be closer to this killer than he really is to make assumptions. And Will, after catching this killer, is to then go on and go into seclusion and be done with what he is doing. Like he's done too many cases. I'm sure they probably have weighed down on him for however long that he did them. Plus, like the thing about Will is he just has like they call it like he has an imagination. Like he can kind of like feel like he knows these people, and like he can expect them to do certain things, or just be like, yeah, like, you wanted to do this, didn't you? And he would be correct about that. So Will is to have some kind of sense. Every once in a while, like some people would have a sense about things. Sometimes it's like weirdly answering a question wrong on some trivia thing, that it's like, how is it that you knew that? And you're just like, I don't know. Like, I just had a feeling that it was probably this answer. And that happens quite a lot in my life for whatever goofy reason. Uh, how did you know that? I don't know. And so luckily I can hopefully figure out the way to channel that thing right now when I have to go on and say the whole film and talk about it. So Will is to go on and come out of retirement because Crawford wants him to. So Will then is to go on and do this case because he has an imagination. And so Will takes on the Red Dragon case, and we come to find out that Will is to try to find the killer of two different families, the Leeds family and, of course, the Jacobuses. Jacobuses? I could say that twice and probably butcher it both of those times. So we have here that Will starts going through the homes and starts figuring things out. And we have Will that can't quite put the pieces together. And so he then has to go on and have help with Hannibal Lecter again. And they are to start putting these things together, as Hannibal is to consistently call Red Dragon Pilgrim, and I kind of wonder why. There's this movie, or there's this. If anybody's going to watch the show The Punisher, in season 2, the villain of that season 2 is called the Pilgrim. And I'm kind of wondering if anybody went on and watched Red Dragon and just called him that, or it's just a weird, goofy coincidence. But I don't know. So, anyways, we have Will and Hannibal that are to try and put the pieces together, all while Hannibal is also doing something bad also, that is to kind of help the villain in this story, who is to be Dollar Hyde, which kind of interesting how Hyde, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, but for this movie also, in my brain, if we don't have Dollar Hyde, we probably don't have the Split movie. When them talking about evolution, and it seems that this guy is to be very strong, and you probably don't have the Split film without this film, which is kind of fascinating to me to probably think of that. And a lot of people have probably never seen the Split film. But yeah, like, that movie is interesting, just to kind of break down like the science of it when you're going through like the multiple personality kind of thing. But anyways, we're going far too into a tether here, so let's go back. So Will Graham is to slowly but surely go through the family's personal things and start to connect the dots, all while we have Dollarhide, who is to find some love of his life named Reba, and eventually hope that he can try to somehow get some normalcy or to eventually stop what he's doing. And the most incredible thing that we get in this movie is when Will is to try to comfort Reba at the end of this film, and how he describes what Dollarhide really was. And I was like, oh my god, this is really interesting. How he goes on and like describes to her. It's like, oh well, like you uh you had a man with a monster on his back, and so like uh so if anything, like you probably saved a lot of lives with you just being with this guy. So with that said, now we have to go on and do the spoilers. Now we have to go on and try to dissect this whole thing out. So that's interesting. Um, so uh, we're gonna try to go on and double fly this bad boy up. The only thing that I think that I did not go on and have the name of is the uh, we of course have Freddie Lowndes, who is to be working for a newspaper, and I know the name comes up, but I don't probably remember what the name of it is. Um, I know that there is to be another thing that comes up later in the movie called Chromolux, and that I remember somehow, but I don't remember. I know the company starts with a T and has another T in it. Um, uh, I don't know. I would take too much time up to try to remember it. So with that said, I think it's about that time to just go on into spoilers. So in the very beginning of this film, we have, of course, Baltimore in 1980. So we have Hannibal Lecter that is going on and watching this concert put together by this full orchestra, or this orchestra. And so we have both woodwinds and we have both uh like woodwinds and instruments and of all kind that are kind of mixed in together. Uh and so we're going on into this concert, and all of a sudden we have one flute player that is to be horrible, and we have Hannibal Lecter in the audience going on, and every time that this flute player is out of key, because weirdly he can tell, Lecter goes on and just kind of shuts one eye, and just consistently shuts one eye, knowing that this one flute player is awful. So, cue us having Lecter and a number of people around his dinner table all being guests. And so they're all going on and saying that, like, man, this I feel so bad just going on and enjoying this meal, when all of a sudden they are to have mentioned that there is a missing band uh, member that they just saw. So come to find out, they're trying to rag on this guy and saying like, well, you know what, like the one thing of it is that this flute player was awful anyways. So if anything, it's just like, thank god, like that guy somehow disappeared. So one of the dinner guests ac- asking Lecter about this meal, um, and she's like, how do you do this? Like, what is the recipe? And Lecter is like, well, you know what, if I told you, you wouldn't want to eat it. So, like, I'm sorry, I can't tell you. So, we just have to assume that Lecter is to feed that own guy, or that own guy, uh, that guy to these people, and just to kind of give them their just desserts, technically. So, for basically like crapping on this guy, and they're gonna be crapping him out later. So Lecter then is to have a private conversation with Will Graham, and this is Edward Norton in this movie. So Will Graham is to talk to Hannibal Lecter, and Will is to mention to Hannibal that there is this murderer, and he feels that the MO about this guy is all wrong. Like, where they were heading for this murder was completely wrong. Will thought that this guy had some absolute grudge, or maybe was some former med student or something like that. But Will is to go on and think that that maybe he was wrong about all this, because Will is to spend time at some like Thanksgiving get together, and a family member is to mention how the back of the turkey is actually the best part of it, and talks about oysters and stuff like that, and Will is like, oh my god, yeah, like Will is to start to notice that some of the people were missing certain parts of their body, and were going on and trying to uh, take tongue and certain parts. So it's like Will is realizing that somehow or another these body parts are going to get cooked into food, and so Will is starting to figure this all out. And so because of the cuts and the way that these bodies were to be opened, so Hannibal goes on and leaves Will for a moment and then comes back, and so Will is going on conveniently through one of these books, and he is to realize that uh, Hannibal in one of these books is to prepare, um, obviously for a meal by saying things like sweetbread in with these things, and he's like, oh my god, like I figured it out. So Will turns and Hannibal stabs Will in the chest, telling him it's like, hey, you're immediately in shock now, and it's just be a matter of time. It's painless. And so Will starts to fall, but when he does, Will is to stab Hannibal in the chest with these arrows that he had. And so Hannibal falls back. Will then is to grab his gun, fire multiple times in Hannibal, and then Hannibal's on this desk. And so, how the police were called, we're just gonna have to figure that out. So, Hannibal is to be arrested. Will goes on to go into seclusion, retirement. He's like, no, like, I solved this case. I'm freaking done. So, Will then is to be working on this boat and is with his wife, Molly, and his son. And so we have Jack Crawford that is to find Will and is to tell Will, like, hey, we need you. Uh, and Will is like, hey, you you have a number of people that can do the exact same thing that I can. Like, I'm no different than any of the other suit guys. And Crawford's like, no, like, you're different. You have imagination, and there's something that you just bring to the table that no one else has. And so Crawford's like, I need you. And so Will is like, well, okay, how about this? I'm gonna do this for a few days, and then I'm done. Like, I'll just kind of go on and just kind of look through and kind of see what I can get, and then we're done. And Crawford's like, hey, if I can get Will to do anything, like, maybe he'll go on and just attach himself to this case just because. So Will then goes on and attaches himself to the case, of course. But so Will then, of course, first goes off to the Leeds home. We do have the other family called the Jacobses, and but we focus on the Leeds family first because that is the fresher kill, sadly enough. Because the Jacobsons, I think, were the first family. But this crime scene is a little bit more fresh. So Will is to go to the Leeds house, and he is to start to think of where the guy would go into a certain part of the house, and so on and so forth. So Will is to immediately ask through this tape recorder, like, where is the dog? What happened to it? So there wasn't a dog in the report. So, as well as Crawford having to tell Will what was happening within these scenes, of course, besides what Will had read in the newspaper about them. So, Will knows about this Red Dragon case, but Crawford is to kind of tell him a little bit more details. And so, when Will goes in this house, he starts to realize that the Leeds husband, of course, was taken out first. Charles Leeds was taken out, and then Valerie was shot twice, and then when Will is to go on and realize that the kids were done after the fact, that Will is to realize that this guy had to have used a silencer. So maybe Will went on and was getting the order confused, because what happened was Will was to talk about how the kids were shot and then dragged into that room. And we also had Crawford saying that there was some blood left in one of the cases, and that he's like AB, his blood type. So Will goes on and is to realize that Dollarhide was to go on put mirrors in certain people's eyes so he could have an audience, because he wanted them to see. And so really all of this was so Dollarhide could have a show, and he wanted to do whatever he was going to do to this woman, and have these other family members watch. So Will is to make the assumption that Dollarhide needed to take off this glove to touch this woman because there was some powder residue, and so Will is going on of like, oh my god, you had to touch her, didn't you? Like, you had to touch her with your actual hands. And so Will is to tell Crawford that they need to go on and inspect the wife's eyes to dust for kind of, or to try to get any kind of fingerprints. And so, coming to find out, Crawford uh, was to know that there was to be a partial thumbprint, and so like, okay, like we can try to figure out who this guy is. But so Graham is to go on to talk to all these detectives and give him the profile of who he thinks this guy is. The only problem is Will is to tell them that like he's gonna kill a lot, and um like this is gonna keep going, but like there's nothing that Will can really go on, and because Will's not really sure about this guy yet, uh he can't like really best um try to put the pieces together. So Will is kind of technically stumped, and Crawford is now asking Will about his prior cases and saying like, well, hey, like, how is it that you caught people before? And Will was like, well, I had help. And Crawford is like, from who? And he's like, well, Hannibal Lecter. And Crawford's like, well, maybe that's a resource. And Will's like, no. And so Crawford's like, well, hey, if you want me to go, like, I'll go. Like, hopefully to get some answers out of that guy. But Will's like, no, if anybody's gonna go, I'm going to have to. So Will then goes on and meets with Hannibal Lecter. So Will makes it to Hannibal Lecter's place, and we have Hannibal who is to talk to Will about his I think it was his aftershave or his cologne that has this little like sailboat logo, and that Hannibal is to give him crap about that immediately. So, because like a guy like Will doesn't care, he'll go for the cheap stuff instead of going and trying to get something expensive, especially considering how really he's just kind of doing this part time. So Will and Hannibal start discussing this case, and we have Hannibal that is to ask is like, well, what's in it for me? And so Will is to tell Hannibal, it's like, well, like we'll go on and give you certain resources. You'll get some computer time, and of course, like he'll be watched over, of course, but still, so or monitored, of course. So Will is to try to go on and talk about this case with Hannibal, because of course Hannibal does take on the case after Will almost leaves. um, like we have at some points where Hannibal is saying to Will, it's like, well, hey, like, why can't you catch this guy? You caught me. And Will was like, well, like this is a different story. And Hannibal's is asking Will, it's like, well, hey, like, how did you catch me? And Will's like, well, Hannibal, you had a disadvantage. Hannibal's like, what? And he was like, well, you're insane. And he's like, oh, okay, all right. We also had a moment where Will was talking to Dr. Chilton, and Dr. Chilton was wanting to get something from Will to figure out Hannibal Lecter, because it seems that um, there was no drugs, there was no kind of things that could work on Lecter, and so uh, Chilton wanted to know how exactly Will was to figure Hannibal out, and Will just turns to the Chilton and says, like, well, like, I had to die for me to know. Like, he had to kill me so I could figure him out. So hey, if you want to play that card, then you can play that card. So, but Will is to talk to Hannibal, and Hannibal is to mention about Will's fear, on how that's obvious. Like, Will fears Hannibal, even though he's technically in this prison, the cell. There's still that fear there, and so Will is going to have to come up with a way to conquer that fear. But so Will gives Lecter this case, and so Hannibal then goes on to keep telling or asking Will about his family to just kind of tick him off. But then not only that, we have Hannibal, who at first is to mention about the whole mirrors thing, and that this guy wants an audience, and so Will's like, I thought of that, and Hannibal's like, yeah, like you already did, and now I'm wasting your time. So Hannibal goes on and is to tell Will, like, you know what? How about you think about the backyards of these people's houses? How more than likely this guy is to want to go outside in the nude and look at the moon, because at night, when blood is to be flowing on a body, it looks quite black. So, from Will and frickin' Lecter's, like, weird, goofy riddles that he keeps going on, to where Will just gets very impatient with Lecter, like, just give me what you want. Just give me what you want. So, Lecter is telling Will that he needs to also go on and see these people alive, these family members, to try and be able to assess why this guy went after them. So Will then goes on to take what Lecter said, and is to go on like, okay, like, I'm gonna try and do what Lecter is to say here. So we go on into this film as I'm trying to look through certain character lists here. Uh, we oh, um, we have Will that goes into Leeds' house and finds some old videotapes. Will starts watching them, and we have this one specific videotape that Will puts in, and is to be from this Chromolux company. So Will goes on, watches this video about this family who is to all be like coming home, I guess from groceries or something like that. And we have the wife who's like, "Give me a close up, Mr. DeVille." And then she's like, "You know what, honey? Like, I think the kids are really tired. I think they need to go to bed." Telling us that somebody's gonna get lucky. Maybe not too lucky because we all know how this story sadly ends. So we have Will, that is just like, well, yeah, I'm watching these videos, but like I'm not quite sure what the connection is. I'm not quite. So Will then is to ask a guy named Byron uh, if there's a possibility. Byron Fetcalf, if there's a possibility that uh, the other family, the Jacobs, was to also have uh, like certain kind of like videos or certain kind of uh, things that could kind of have Will be able to figure things out. And Byron's like, well, you know what? This is going to be a pain in the butt to try to trek these things out to you. But Byron is to tell Will, it's like, tell me whatever I'm going to give you is going to help you catch this guy. And Will is like, it will. And so he's like, okay, like, I'll do it. So, Will is to go on and also find out that it seems that I had a second to just pause here. Willis also meet a guy named Freddie Lowndes, and so when Will meets up with Freddie Lowndes, come to find out these guys have a bad history with one another, and so when Will meets up with Freddie, Will kind of thrusts him against this van, and like obviously hates him because come to find out Will was to have Freddie sneaking in on him in the hospital, taking pictures of him while he slept, and it was all on the news the next day. So hence why we of course have Will who hates this guy. So we have Will that let's transition to Hannibal Lecter. So Hannibal Lecter is to get phone privileges. Hannibal Lecter goes on and is to call his lawyer. And Hannibal goes on, instead of calling his lawyer, instead he goes on and is trying to figure out the address for Will Graham. And Hannibal is to pretend that he's some FedEx carrier and just needs this address. And so the only address that he can get is to be from Florida. So we have somehow in this movie where Dollarhide is to find out that Hannibal is working with Will. And so Dollarhide sends Lecter messages through this toilet paper. So we have that going on, but I'll get to that further in a second here. So Dollarhide is to now go on and do his job. So Dollarhide goes on to this facility where it's to be this kind of very blacklight room and photo editing or photo developing. And so Dollarhide goes on to meet with a girl named Rebecca McLean, and she is to mention to Dollarhide where to go in the room, because of course she knows very well uh, where exactly to head. So we all of a sudden have a guy barging in this film, and he of course is to uh, be Ralph. Ralph, at the very end of this thing, at the very end of the list of things, Ralph goes on to try to get a date with Reba, and Reba's not interested, and so Ralph just walks away. Reba just mentions that Ralph is just a walking hard on, and so we have Dollarhide that is to get uh, this certain kind of equipment, and so once uh, once we have Dollarhide who ends up leaving for the night from his work, uh, Reba is to need to get rides. And so Ralph was offering, and Reba turned him down. And so Dollarhide ends up picking Reba up and saying like, "Well, hey, will you come to me or come with me? Like it'll be my pleasure." And so Reba goes on and says like, "Sure, like I'll go with you." So they go out together, and so eventually Reba is to go on and want to feel Dollarhide's face. Because Reba, while talking to Dollarhide, is interested if Dollarhide is smiling or frowning, and Dollarhide, before Reba is to touch his face, Dollarhide says it's like just accept that I'm gonna tell you that I'm smiling. So Dollarhide goes on and is fairly uncomfortable with Reba, and so he decides to leave. But it seems that overall they have a pretty decent date with one another, even though Dollarhide is very quiet. And so so after that whole meeting, we have both Reba and Dollarhide meet again. And so Reba goes to Dollarhide's place, and while they're both together, he is going on and having Reba tell him what all the other workers thought about Dollarhide, that like he looks like really strong, and all the girls were kind of curious if Dollarhide was as strong as he looked, and that also like they were to say a number of other things about him. So Dollarhide is to then be needing to go on and watch this video for work, and Reba, of course, is before that, uh, wanting to go to Dollarhide and kiss him, because she ends up kind of touching his lips and then kissing him. And so we then go on, have them sit on this couch together, still listening to this music after they've gone on and they've kissed. And Dollarhide is watching this video of this family of who he's gonna go after next. And Reba is asking Dollarhide, like, well, hey, like, what is this video about? And Dollarhide's just like, oh, it's just some job video, it's just some like corporate thing. And so Reba's like, oh, so like it'll give you something to be like prepared for in the future. And I guess that's good, right? And Dollarhide's like, yeah, sure. So all of a sudden, Reba is to start to get closer and closer to Dollarhide, and then ends up going on to feel into his pants, and then more than likely gives him a BJ. Uh, so I kind of wanted to cover those, um, but now let's go back into, of course, the whole toilet paper situation. So, come to find out, one of the people that worked at this prison was to notice that within this toilet paper roll there was a secret message between both Dollarhide and Lecter. So, they want to know what this message is, and so they force Lecter to go into this room and keep him there. And so they go after his message, they take photos of it, and so they then give his message back to him. And Will is telling the guys that are at this place, it's like, well, hey, like, you guys need to stall for us to have this message. So go on and try to have a repairman going through and being angry and upset, and go on and just try to make this look good. So Lecter goes on and sees this repairman, and then Lecter, when finally making to his cell, is to realize that there is a guy with these gloves, and Lecter's like, something went on here. So, come to find out of this secret message, we have one of the tech guys who is kind of use a certain equipment to eventually realize that within this letter there is a news company that Lecter is going to deliver a message for only supposedly Dollarhide to understand. And so supposedly in the message there's a bunch of T's and an R, so like, what could this mean? So they realize that it's Tatler, the newspaper company. I'm like, oh, thank God I remember that. So they figure that out, and so come to find out, they're like, well, how could he release such a message? And so they end up finding out it's like in a personal ad. And so Lecter then goes on and is to write this certain book verse. And so one of the guys is to figure out that it has to be tied to whatever Lecter is to have in his prison cell. And so if they have a list of this guy's books, they'll be able to figure it out. So the guy ends up figuring it out, Lloyd, and is to come up with this certain thing that is to have uh, Dollarhide get a message that Will's family is in Florida, and so now Will has to go on and relocate both Molly and his son in the middle of the night while they're sleeping, and like relocate them and get them the heck out of there. And so when Will meets up with Molly, I think at like one of Crawford's relatives, like Crawford's brother's place. So Will ends up talking to Molly about like this situation, and so but we have Will continuing on to do this case even though his family is even at jeopardy. So Will continues on doing this case. So we still have Will who is having problems figuring this all out. And we, as well as me, having problems figuring this all out. Why can't you just easily just plop this all out like it's nobody's business? Because, yeah, it's a 2 hour and 4 minute film. Whoops. Plus, it's fairly complicated. So, Will, I might have to pause here for a second. Once Will's life, or once Will's wife and kid are in jeopardy, we then have Will who turns around and is to use Freddie Loud's to then have him put together a like an exclusive all about the Dollarhide guy. They end up calling him the Tooth Fairy. So, because of course he has a certain bite mark that the detectives end up calling it like, well, it looks like a shark mark. It looks weird. Come to find out, this guy Dollarhide is to have these certain dentures. And I also want to bring this scene up. So, we have at one moment in the early parts of this movie, Dollarhide is just benching all this weight on this bench, just pumping back and forth. I don't know how much weight is actually on here, but I would like to hopefully assume that it's probably about 315 pounds. just pumping, and yeah, because I'm sure it's probably a ridiculous weight. So while Francis is weirdly just pumping away on the bench here, we also have this weird background crap going on where Dollarhide is being tortured by his grandmother, and the grandmother is to punish Dollarhide for, I guess, peeing his pants, and that she used to say, it's like, well, hey, like, if you touch yourself again, I'm gonna cut it off. Not your hand, something else. So it seems by the end of the movie, from this this kind of horrific hearing that we're hearing in the beginning of here, or in the scene here, we then have Francis's diary, where we have these same kind of things kind of in this book that we saw in that early part where he's pumping iron and bench pressing and whatever. And so to tell us that this guy was like not born this kind of way, like he was made into being this monstrous thing. And when Will goes on and reads the diary later on in the movie, he's like, man, like this guy was just sad that he was just built to be this kind of monstrous thing. But anyways, let's backpedal here. We're not at the end of the film quite yet. So Will goes on and is trying to lure out Dollarhide by saying that he works at this specific office, take a picture of stuff in the background so this guy can figure out where he is. So instead of Dollarhide immediately going after Will, because Will is to go on and say that like Dollarhide is like a less than, and that when Will is to take counsel from Hannibal, Hannibal felt the same, so on and so forth. And so we have Freddy who's going on and taking every word that these guys are to slam and say about this guy. And so Freddy is telling Will, it's like, well, hey, like, you know what? I'll scratch your back if you scratch mine. If you guys finally catch this guy, like, I want an exclusive. So Will's like, sure, whatever. So instead of Dollarhide immediately going after Will, Dollarhide instead with this van is to go after Freddy Lounds. Or Lounds. Lounds? Anyway, so, because come to find out, Dollarhide is too early in the day go on and find this newspaper that's selling this, and so the guy is to tell Dollarhide that like he's not going to be selling these papers yet, but Dollarhide just kind of throws him the amount of money for this newspaper and just takes it. The guy's like, hey, what did I say? And Hyde whips out this knife and just like, what? And the guy's like, no problem, like just go on and just take it. So Dollarhide then goes after Freddy and is to chloroform him, and he ends up super gluing this guy to this chair. I'm like, oh my god. Man. I remember there was one time I like was to like super glue like something on my hand by like accident, and it left like some super glue on my hand, like nothing. I didn't stick anything to it, but it just stayed there, and so I had to kind of like peel it off my hand, and luckily like I easily got it off. And I'm like, man, could I just imagine what could have happened accidentally, because those things set within seconds. But so Freddy then goes on and is stuck into this chair, and he's trying to pull away with his head and his arms, and he can't get out of this chair. I'm like, oh my god. So Freddy is to have his eyes consistently closed because he, of course, does not want to see who Francis is. And so Francis is telling Freddy that Francis wants him to see him, and also wants to like see like everything. So Francis then goes on is to put this slideshow for Freddy to go on and see all the families before and all of them like after, while they had basically been killed. And Freddy is going on like, no, I don't want to see all this. And so Freddy is to basically like, hey, like I will say all your praises, like I will go on and like I will like uh, like correct myself, and from here on out, this and that. So Dollarhide makes Freddy go on and do this recording where Freddy is to mention that he had seen uh, Dollarhide's like true greatness, and this and that, and his awe. And so Freddy is to go on and mention that he uh, was to have put out all of Will's lies. And so for what Dollarhide will do to Freddy won't be nearly as bad as what he'll do to Will. And so Dollarhide goes on and is to chew, or is to bite into Freddy, and then we end up seeing him in a blaze of fire in this wheelchair, um, making his way to having this guy go, "Oh my god, this guy, he's on fire." So Will gets the recording of what Freddy had said, and it's like, all right, like, okay, sure. So I think after that, we have Dollarhide and we have Reba that go on to this this one part of this zoo, that because Reba loves animals, and so when Reba is to cut up this pie and give Dollarhide this thing of equipment, she's talking about animals and just kind of talking this and that. So Dollarhide brings in Reba into this this medical room where they're going on and doing something medical with this tiger, and so Reba is able to touch this tiger, and Dollarhide watches on as she does this. So, because Dollarhide is to have Reba go to this place where he can't tell her where it's going because he wants to surprise her. So Reba goes on and does this. So we have Dollarhide take Reba to his place, and so they both sleep together, and so now Dollarhide is having problems with what the Red Dragon is telling him to do, because the Red Dragon, technically his other entity, his thing that he talks to, is saying that it wants Reba, and Dollarhide's like, no, like, I won't give her to you, like, I want her. And the Red Dragon is just kind of like, no. So it seems that Dollarhide wants to change a new leaf. We also have Will that is looking into the Red Dragon thing, as Will is to ask this certain librarian about these Blake books, and Blake ends up going on and finding out about the Red Dragon, because Will, when he goes into the yards of uh, of these homes, he then goes up into this tree and is to realize that he has this perfect vantage point to these certain windows. And so Will realizes that there is a carving in this tree because Francis was so proud about him going on and doing this that he had to like symbolize his work. So Will looks into the symbol but he goes on and talks to Hannibal Lecter. So Will talks to Hannibal, and come to find out the symbol is to be the red dragon. And that's, of course, when Hannibal is to start calling this guy the Pilgrim. And so we have Will talking to Hannibal while he's going and doing this kind of exercise. And so Hannibal, I guess, through his lawyer, is asking these guys that he should get some equal kind of things compared to all the other prisoners, even though he technically eats people. So Will and Hannibal are talking about the case more, and so Will is to still try and get some secret thing that both Dollarhide and Lecter know, and Will is just tired of all the cryptic crap that Lecter is to kind of go on and tell him. But so Lecter goes on and still isn't really giving him much of anything, but Lecter is to also go and ask Will, like, hey, like, give Mullen your son my love. And Will's like, you son of... I hate you. Like, man, every single time you're going on and talking about my family, you, like, I hope you rot in here. So, we also had Dr. Clinton that was taking certain things away from Hannibal, his books, all of his luxuries, and also taking away his toilet seat. And so that's when Will goes on and meets with Hannibal and is to ask about, like, well, hey, like, I need to know, like, what you wrote to him, or what he wrote, like, something secret between the two of you. So, but yeah, so Will just can't really get anything. So Will then is to go on and go through these videos one more time. And Will is to realize that Francis was to take bolt cutters with him, and Will is like, why? Like, this seems such like a stupid thing for him to carry. And Will goes to see the guy that is to reinstall this door, and the guy's like, well, hey, this guy's never breaking here again. And Will's like, why didn't he go through this door instead of that one? And the guy is like, well, obviously this guy was in a rush. And Will's like, no, this guy had no rush. So, come to find out, Will was to just continue to keep going through these videos, trying to figure out, it's like, well, hey, like, how did Francis know everything? And Will starts to go on, like, you know what, like, it seems that, like, this dog, like, he knew that the dog didn't have a collar, and that, like, he knew certain doors were to have certain things about them. And how did he know all of these things that seem to be all put together in this video? It just seems kind of weird. Like, we need to know everything just from this video alone. How is it that he knew this also? And then he's like, oh my god. So Will is to put the pieces together that Chromalex was to somehow be the culprit of this case. To say that one person who worked with his company was to then go on and go after these clients and start to go after them and kill them. Kind of, it feels like the movie Deadly Virtues, where, come to find out at the end of Deadly Virtues, the way the guy ended up going into the people's homes was because he makes keys for everybody, and you don't find that out until the very end. It kind of ruins the movie. Uh, but I was like, man, this guy just is going in this person's house like it's nobody's business. Um, but come to find out, like, the interesting thing about Deadly Virtues is that the guy goes on and, like, is doing so many good things to the woman, but then turns around and treats the man like dirt. But then there's a whole reason for that that gets really interesting by the end of the film, and I'm like, oh my god, the whole big reveal of that. So, but Will goes on and is to find out about the company. So Will immediately goes to the people in this company, the Chromalux, and is to, like, ask them. It's like, well, hey, like, do any of your workers kind of fit this profile? And so, uh, with Will saying, it's like, well, is there anybody with a massive amount of number of tattoos, like a kind of facial disformity? And so the guy is going on of like, well, that seems like Dollar High. That seems like that guy. And so they're like, okay, so we're gonna go and try to get to him, thinking that it's this guy. So Dollar Hyde is to meet Rebecca again, who is with Ralph. And so Ralph is talking to Reba, and Ralph is mentioning to Reba that maybe there might be something off with Dollar Hyde, and that maybe she should stop seeing him. And once Ralph kind of walks away after talking to Reba, Dollar Hyde shoots Ralph in the head, and then Dollar Hyde is to show up with Reba to say, like, hey, you need to come with me. So Reba comes to be in Dollar Hyde's place, and so Dollar Hyde is mentioning to Reba that there's somebody here after her, because after Dollar Hyde was to try and stop whatever it is that's on his back to not hurt Reba, and Dollar Hyde goes to the Brooklyn Museum to find the Red Dragon painting and eat it and destroy this painting forever, and goes on and knocks a couple of women out afterwards. But I guess they still couldn't figure out who this guy still is. Even though they could have like a drawing of this guy and whatever, this sketch artist and whatever, it doesn't matter. So Dollar hides with Reba and is to pour gas all over this room. And so Dollar Hyde is telling Reba that that someone is to want to kill Reba, and Dollar Hyde is trying to protect her. And the only way he can think to protect her is to douse this room in flames and shoot her first, and then he'll do himself. So we have Dollar Hyde that is supposed to shoot Reba, but then he couldn't go through with it, and so he shoots himself. Reba then is to start walking through this place on fire as Will and Crawford are chasing their way to Dollar Hyde's home. And so they realize that the home is in flames. So Reba all of a sudden is to hear the gong of this clock, and so Reba's like, oh my god, like I know where the clock is, so I know where I am in the room. So Reba is to figure out a way to escape this place, and Will and Crawford make it to this place on fire, and luckily Reba is to get out of there just in time, and so they assume that this is Dollarhide who was shot, and they're like, okay, this is now over. So Will is talking to Reba, convincing her that um, like she wasn't in love with a monster, she was in love with a man with a monster on his back. And so Will was telling Reba that the moments that she was with this guy, he was trying to change and trying to be better. And so Will is telling Reba that this girl saved a number of lives by just being with this guy. And so Will is to say, it's like, well, yeah, um, don't change a thing. Maybe your hair next time I meet with you, but everything else is fine. And so Will is mentioning that he's going to go on and definitely come back and see this girl once again, just to kind of make sure that she's okay. So Will then leaves and is to think it's another job well done, and it's like, okay, I'm just gonna get out of here. But Francis is to get this diary from uh, from Dollarhide, and he reads it. So Will is to talk to Molly and mention that while he read this, he just thought that Will was sad, or Will thought that Dollarhide was sad, and that this guy was like built up to be this way over time, and that it just was like a snowball effect of all these kind of collection of things. Kind of again weirdly like Split, where they go on and they start mentioning how every personality eventually the guy from Split was to accumulate was because of all these certain events that just kind of compiled over time. So Will's with Molly thinking that everything is safe, secure, and whatever. And so all of a sudden Crawford is to get some information that it seems that Dollarhide is still alive, and that the actual body was of someone else. So Crawford dials Will's home and is telling him that Dollarhide is still alive, and Crawford is going to send a number of police to his place to make sure that uh, that Will's safe. So Will is to hear this message and is immediately thinking that something's going on in his home, because Will is waiting for his son to come back with these marshmallows, and he doesn't come back. So Will's like, okay, like, I'm getting a little marshmallow hungry. I'm gonna go into the house. All of a sudden Will looks into one of these mirrors and realizes that the mirror is cracked, and he's like, oh my god. So Will starts going through the house and is to eventually realize all the mirrors are cracked. So Will has a number of knives on him and is just kind of going through his house. So Will eventually is to go into this room where Dollarhide is, uh, with Will's son. So Will goes on to pull what one of the girls goes on and does in one of the Friday the 13th movies, where she puts on Jason's mother's sweater and is to like try to go on and pull off this mothering voice and sound like Jason's mother, so that way Jason will stop doing what he's doing, or she hopes that he can just kind of be controlled by her. So Will goes on and is to tell his son because he peed himself out of fear, Will's like, "Oh, you peed yourself? Uh, am I gonna have to cut it off? And you beast, and you this, and you that." So Will keeps going on and saying all these things that were out of that book that he learned to say to his son, but it was really meant for Francis. And so Dollarhide shoves this kid away, lunges after Will, and so both of them start fighting it out uh, in this hallway. Will gets stabbed in the chest, kind of a little, like, kind of across the chest. So Will closes this door, and we have Dollarhide that keeps ramming into the door, trying to break into it. Will starts to go on and is to grab for his gun. So all of a sudden the banging stops because Dollarhide goes and hides himself because Molly's walking into the house. Will is to see Molly's footsteps and then sees Dollarhide. And so Will tells Molly to duck, and Will starts shooting into the door, and so does Dollarhide. Will ends up getting shot multiple times, and Dollarhide ends up getting shot a couple times also. And so Will is telling Molly that she needs to go on and shoot Francis and make sure he's dead. Shoot him in the head. So she does multiple times, and so now this whole story, of course, is to be resolved. So now we, of course, have Hannibal Lecter that is sending, of course, Graham this letter saying that Will is to possibly be like healing from his wounds, and so Lecter is to go on and give Will this last note that he goes on and crumples it up in this into his hand and shoves it out in the water, and then goes on his boat to just live out his days with just like, dude, I'm just gonna be on this boat. Like, I'm just gonna get out of here. I'm gonna sail across the world, whatever. So, but that's it. That covers most of the movie. Not perfect. I get that. But when looking at it, it could be a heck of a lot worse. Because I could have remembered diddly nothing. Let me know in the comments below if there's a million things that I had forgotten about. Because I'm sure that there probably is. At the end of the day, I'm going to say that if it seems that this is to be interesting to people, I will go on and do the possible sequels, as I'm kind of interested in just kind of doing that anyways at some point, depending on how really I can handle all of these on certain days and so on and so forth. So with that said, I'm glad that this is actually just done, because I'm like, man, I was like, I don't know, I don't know how complicated these usually are. I don't know about how well I'm gonna remember all the dialogue and all these things. Also, let me know in the comments below if the book is like the films. If there's any different tweaks and changes. I always like that kind of stuff, honestly. Because there's a lot of times where we would obviously go and watch a Harry Potter movie, and there's a billion things that is in the book that wasn't in the films, because the books would have had to have been a show rather than a movie. Harry Potter is the easiest, quickest example, simply because I know a lot of actors that went on and actually were to say that in certain interviews, going on and talk about the Harry Potter books and just saying like, yeah, like I didn't want to read any of the Harry Potter books after a certain portion of things, because there was no time for them to be able to cover everything. So it just kind of felt like a wasted amount of time to just read all the books. So with that said, almost an hour and a half. Oh my god. If I was just to be like, man, like 50 minutes is really pushing it. Like I know, like The Dark Knight took 2 hours. So yeah, these are long reviews. I apologize, but otherwise, these are the way they are. Um, and so I'm just gonna keep doing them that way because I've done them the way they are. Like I could apologize, but then I'll just turn around and just be like, well, but I'm not gonna change. Because eventually, people will make their way here. Eventually, people will go on and be like, wow, that's clever that he's going on and reviewing this and no one else is. Maybe somewhere down in the. I'm talking for too long. I'm gonna get out of here. Bye, buddy. Bye, buddy.